Hey guys, glad to have you back for another lesson. So today we are going to look at the neuromuscular system. Now, usually if you take an AMP class, it's two separate chapters usually, but I think TEAS just puts them together because those two systems are closely linked. So the muscular system is controlled by the nervous system. So we're just going to follow TEAS and put those two chapters together. Again, you can find the information in the official study manual, and it's going to be on page 115. All right, let's look at the nervous system first. And then we're going to look at the muscular system and how the motor neurons can control muscle contraction. So first of all, you need to have a very good picture, a full picture of the functions of the nervous system. And there are going to be some questions, possibly, on the overall functions and especially the differences between sensory and motor. All right, so we're going to talk about this real quick. Now, we always call the nervous system the command center of the body, right? So how does this command center work? Now, first of all, any command center would need to gather information first, right? So the first step is going to be sensory input. So all the information regarding the stimuli, the changes in the internal and external environment are going to be the sensory input that's sent into the central nervous system, right? Which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So I'm just going to call it CNS. Now, with that information, the CNS is going to do some processing and interprets that information. So this is how you can see things, right? Once the CNS processes the vision, the sensory information, this is how you see different objects, different movements, things like that. And then the CNS is going to decide whether an action is needed. All right, so that happens in the CNS as integration. And then after decision is made, the CNS is going to send information out into an effector organ. Effector. Okay, so it could be muscles, which usually you can control consciously. Specifically, that would have to be skeletal muscles that you can control consciously. Okay, so that's called a voluntary control. All right, now you can also control the other two types of muscles, if you remember from the first lesson, and that's going to be cardiac muscle and the smooth muscle. All right, so the motor input can also be going to these two types of muscles, but it's going to be under involuntary control, meaning you cannot control them consciously. So this all happens without you consciously knowing that. So it's done automatically by your nervous system. All right. Now, the motor output can also affect glands, okay? Like a secretion of sweat glands or secretion of glands in your digestive system or secretion of glands in your endocrine system. So all these glands can also be affected, right, as a result of the decision made by the CNS. All right. Now, a couple words. Sensory, again, all the information about changes in the environment going into the CNS is a sensory. And sensory is input. And sometimes we also call it afferent. Now, in contrast, the motor output, it's coming out of the CNS. That information is called motor output. And then we can also call it efferent. So you can remember E for exit, right? The information is exiting, coming out of the CNS. All right, so that's the kind of three components of the general function of the nervous system, more like a 3 steps. So next, we're going to look at the organization of the nervous system. So again, this is not really about the specific, structures of the nervous system, but more about different divisions, different arms, different components. So we just mentioned information going into the CNS is called a sensory input, right? So all the structures that are involved in sending that information toward the CNS is a part of the sensory or afferent division, right? So usually it's nerve fibers that will carry or transmit that information into the CNS. Now, I just want to mention real quick that information is in electrical signals. So we call it electrical impulses, or sometimes we call it nerve impulses. Okay, so it's not chemical signals, but electrical signals. All right, now somatic sensory fibers. So more specifically, we have somatic sensory fibers. They will carry information from skin, from skeletal muscles, from your joints, from your ligaments, from your tendons into the central nervous system. Okay. All right. Now, usually when you see somatic, that means it's something that you can consciously control, and usually it's related to the structures in the skeletal system and the muscular system. Now, visceral sensory fiber carry information from visceral organs to the central nervous system. So visceral organs are most of the soft organs that you are familiar with, right? Like all the organs in your digestive system, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, pancreas, right? You also have some other organs in the abdominal, pelvic cavity. So you have the spleen, you have the urinary bladder, you have the reproductive organs, right? So all those are considered visceral organs. So if there are any changes in those organs, the sensory fibers can send that information, which we call the visceral sensory information, back to the CNS, and then the CNS can integrate that information and make a decision. All right, the second division is the motor division. So again, the motor means end result, right? So that's the end of the division made by the CNS. So the motor information or efferent information is carried out by the motor nerve fibers. And they will carry the electrical or the nerve impulses, right, which are electrical impulses, away from the CNS into an effector organ. So again, that could be muscles or could be glands. All right, so that's the two main divisions. Now, in terms of the general functions, right, now specific structures. Okay, we just mentioned the sensory and motor. Here I have a flow chart that shows you a quick overview of the different divisions in the nervous system. Okay, so let's look at the overview, and then I want to talk really quick about the two subdivisions of the motor division. Now, if you just look at the nervous system, there are two main components. The first one is the central nervous system, CNS, and the second component is a peripheral nervous system, which is a PNS. And in CNS, we know we have the brain and we have the spinal cord, which we'll look at later. All right. Now, the PNS consists of nerves that extend from the brain and the spinal cord and innervates different parts of your body. So the nerves are very important. So nerves consist of, bundles of nerve fibers that can transmit nerve impulses into the brain, and that will be sensory nerve fibers, right, or afferent. Or the nerves may transmit information from the CNS into an effector organ. So that would be the motor division. Right? So again, the motor division will, result in an output or end result or some kind of effect, right? Some kind of action. All right. Now, the action is usually achieved by these things, which can be further divided into two subdivisions. All right. So when we look at the motor division, the output, you can have two subdivisions. So the first subdivision is called the somatic nervous system. So this only includes effector organs that are skeletal muscles. Okay? So only skeletal muscles. And the somatic nervous system is under voluntary control, meaning you can control those tissues, organs consciously or intentionally. So let's do a quick test. Can you move your fingers and your arms? You can, right? You can. If you can't, you are in big trouble. So if you can move them consciously, that means it's going to be under the somatic nervous system. And usually it's pretty much just skeletal muscles, right? Now, the second subdivision is called autonomic nervous system. Now, based on the name, you see auto, right? That means this subdivision can pretty much perform on its own without you consciously control them, right? And this includes cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. All right, so they're under involuntary control. So here, let's do another test. Let's say you are watching the video, right? So you are not very, very nervous. You're pretty calm, pretty restful. So let's say we want you to kind of make your heart beat faster. So can you consciously control the cardiac muscle in the heart to make them contract faster? You can't, right? Nobody can, because cardiac muscle is under involuntary control, regulated by the autonomic nervous system. So this is a system that's pretty much on autopilot. Okay? All right, same thing for smooth muscle. Right? So smooth muscle is present in the walls of visceral organs such as stomach, your intestines, your pancreas, your esophagus, your liver. So again, you can't really control the contraction of smooth muscle in those organs, right? So everything is done involuntarily without you consciously knowing it. Okay? Same thing for glands too. Let's say it's very hot outside and you're sweating and you don't look very nice. Can you consciously, control those sweat glands and have them not secrete sweat? You can't, right? It's under involuntary control. Okay. All right, so that's the differences between somatic and autonomic visions. Okay, so make sure you know the difference. It's very important. All right, now when you look at the autonomic nervous system, which is the autopilot of your nervous system, they control, or let me rephrase this. It has two arms that are pretty much the opposite. Okay, so the first arm is called sympathetic. And you can see that I put it in this yellow color. So yellow usually indicates a warning, right? Danger, warning. So the sympathetic nervous system, it's usually activated when you are emotionally stressed, you have a physical threat, almost like you're in an emergency situation. Okay? That's when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. On the other hand, when you're really calm, you're really restful, you are not stressed out, the parasympathetic system is going to be put into work. All right, so they are almost the opposite. So this is very important, and I have seen questions about the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So again, like I said, the sympathetic usually is kind of related to some kind of physical stress or threat. So this is what we commonly call fight or flight division. So you can remember this as the E division. So when you do these things, and normally the sympathetic nervous system is activated. All right. I'll have a more detailed list on the next slide. Let me just finish the parasympathetic real quick. So this arm controls housekeeping activities. And so that happens when you're really, restful, right? You're just kind of rest and digest. So it's very different than the fight or flight. You're conserving energy, right? You're not doing anything very vigorous. You are only doing the kind of baseline housekeeping activities, right? So digestion, defecation, diuresis. So this means production of urine. which is similar to defecation, right? When you're really restful, your body performs those activities. So I found this list from the internet. I think it's a very good, very detailed list. Usually when you're in an emergency situation, let's say you're scared by somebody, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. So what happens is you're going to have a dilation of pupils. And why? Because usually in an emergency situation, you need to see better, right? So your pupils will dilate to allow more light into your eyes so that your brain can have more information to process, right? So you can see better. And your heart rate will increase, and that makes sense, right? Because you are going to need more blood to probably, either fight or run away. So the increasing heart rate can pump more blood into the critical organs like your brain, your heart itself, and your skeletal muscles. Your long bronchioles, those are a little kind of tube-like structures that conduct air. So those bronchioles or bronchi, the bronchi are the main ducts that conduct air into your lungs. So those ducts will dilate. Why? Because when they dilate, they get wider. They allow more air, right, to go through. So that means you get more air in the lungs. You get more oxygen in your body because your brain, your skeletal muscles need oxygen. And in an emergency situation, those organs are going to require more oxygen. Gut wall. So you don't want to perform rest or digestion, right? So you need to decrease motility of the gut walls because you want very little digestion. Next, very important things are over here. I've seen questions that mention this. So your salivary glands will have concentrated, very viscous saliva instead of watery saliva. So this is going to lead to dry mouth. Because again, your priority now is not digestion, right? All right, I think that's most of the things that you may see. Right. Now for parasympathetic is pretty much the opposite, right? Your pupils will constrict because you don't need to see better. You're very relaxed. Your heart rate will also decrease because you don't need to pump more blood with oxygen into different organs. Bronchioles constrict, so similar with the blood. You don't need to, send extra oxygen to your brain, to your skeletal muscles. Gut walls, now you can perform digestion. So the smooth muscle in the gut walls will increase their motility to allow digestion. And then the salivary glands, like I said earlier, you're going to have more watery, abundant, in high amount, right? Abundant saliva to digest food. So digestion of food actually starts in the mouth. Okay, so that's the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So again, this is very important because I have seen questions related to these two subdivisions. Okay, so I just moved this question up here so that we can have a practice right after the materials on the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this is quite a long question, so I'm going to give you a few seconds to read the question and choose your answer. All right. Anxiety about upcoming final exam causes a student to experience a few things. So first is increase in blood pressure, dilation of pupils, and a dry mouth. Which of the following nervous system responses is responsible for these symptoms? So I saw this question somewhere. I thought it was a very good question. So cognitive, no, because cognitive is about thinking and processing information, right? Maybe when you actually start, working on the questions, answering the questions, then you use your cognitive function. And limbic, so the limbic is really about emotions. So the limbic center actually consists of multiple little structures in the brain, and that's the emotional brain. So that's the limbic center. So it has nothing to do with emotions here. All right, sympathetic, parasympathetic. Which one is it? Your heart is probably beating fast. You have increasing blood pressure, so that you can pump blood into your brain, your skeletal muscles. Pupils dilate. You can see better. More viscous saliva instead of good amount of water saliva to digest carbohydrates. So all those things point to fight or flight, right? Something that makes you very nervous, very stressed out. So that's sympathetic. All right. Now, voluntary, no, this is definitely not voluntary, right? If we could control those things, I think we would, but we cannot. Right? You have no control, no conscious control over blood pressure, dilation pupils, or dry mouth. So correct answer is C.